Katie here from Codima, Dublin's energy agency. You are all very welcome to our Think Energy Hub. Today I'm joined by Eric Dennis from KSN Energy, and I'm going to be picking his brain on all things home energy upgrades. Eric, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Hi Katie, thanks for having me. Looking
So
forward to the chat.
Brilliant. Before we jump into these questions, of which I have many, could you just explain a little bit about what you do?
So I work for a company called KSN Energy. We do quite a lot of work with the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. I'm a program manager and work mainly on the Better Energy Homes scheme. I also do some work with yourselves in Codima on the Sustainable Energy Communities program. I'm the county mentor for the Fingal area. So as part of that, we kind of, with the work with SCI and Better Energy Homes, we do quite a bit on quality management, on the various SCI grant schemes. And then on the community side of it, I'd engage with local communities, helping them get committees up and running, doing their energy master plans for their areas, and hopefully moving on to complete kind of energy upgrades in their local communities.
Wow. So many a hat.
Indeed.
So in short, you're absolutely the best person to be having this conversation with, I feel.
Thanks.
You're very modest, very modest. Okay, so let's kick off. So, I think there are a lot of people who would like to invest in some sort of home energy upgrade, but are just completely unsure where to start. So what would be your advice on where they should begin?
I suppose there's lots that people can do in their homes. For me, I think it can be quite daunting when you're trying to figure out what to do, and that creates a bit of inertia. So I suppose just do anything or do something. Um, Generally, the best place to start are the easy wins. Like there's plenty of things you can do, possibly even yourself, like upgrading your lighting from just your normal sort of light bulbs and light fittings to high end or to low energy kind of fittings and light bulbs, and draft proofing. Like even those two small kind of changes can make a big difference to comfort as well as your energy usage. After that, you kind of get into bigger ticket items like attic insulation and heating controls. But even those two, the attic is often forgotten because you're never really in there. And even houses built up to 2004, 2005 could benefit from attic insulation. I suppose a lot of people think, okay, fair enough. If I'm living in a house that's built in 1970, yeah, there's probably, and haven't done anything in the attic. But like right up to houses built right up to like 2005, you could probably benefit from some sort of a level of attic top up,
Yeah.
and brands that are available for that. So for me, like if it's not kind of small things like lights and draft proofing, there isn't really grants for, and they're more kind of DIY measures. Like, but if you're getting into works where you need to get contractors in, I think the attic is probably the best place to start. And
Brilliant.
and probably more people. There's more people that probably need the top up than actually would realize it themselves.
Yeah. Okay. That is good to know that it could be a house built 2005, 2006. It doesn't have to be all those many years ago.
Yeah. Generally, kind of pre 2006 is kind of what you'd be
Okay.
looking at
Okay.
for the likes of attic.
Brilliant. And I suppose, before even beginning any upgrades, it's probably really important to even just get an idea of, the problem areas of your home, your current energy efficiency, where your house is currently at. Could you kind of talk to us a little bit about building energy rating assessments and kind of what's involved, why it would be important to maybe invest in one, and just kind of talk to us about that?
Sure. Building energy rating assessments are essentially a building energy rating. They're carried out by a building energy rating assessor who will call out to your home. And essentially, what a building energy rating will and can do for your home is provide a baseline for your energy use. BOR assessors as well, particularly like experienced BOR assessors, will have a great sort of catalogue of, like, they'll have been in hundreds of houses, And generally, they work relatively locally as well. Like, okay, some will be national, but they'll generally have an area or region that they work in. So they'll probably know houses like yours or been in your estate before, or a type of house that was built around the same time. So not only will it give you this baseline of energy use, okay, they're slightly generic to some extent, but again, speaking with a BER assessor and having the BER assessment there, you will get some recommendations from there, and it'll
Mhm.
give you a good starting point on where to start out on your road to upgrading your energy, in your home.
Yeah, and in terms of, the average cost you'd be looking at for a BU assessment, where would that sit?
Kind of BER assessments, you'll see stuff advertised quite low, and a huge range kind of out there. But for me, I think like a fair price for a building energy rating would be around between 120, 30 up to maybe 250. It's very much dependent on the size of
Of the
the
house.
house. You
Okay.
if you have a 6,000 square foot house with 10 extensions, it's probably not going to be 250 euros. Like, so
Okay.
it's there is a little bit of a scale there.
Yeah.
But like, I think, yeah, anywhere in that range. Like, so if you're in a kind of small apartment, maybe 120, 30 up to kind of your regular 3, 4 bed house up to the 250 kind of range. And then there's going to be variables either side of that, but
Of course.
in
Yeah.
that range, I think it's perfect.
And I suppose just to say as well, if you're not even in the kind of headspace to get a BER assessment just yet, our home energy saving kits that we have that are available in over 100 libraries now across Ireland, that's a free way of just kind of getting an idea of where your home is at, figure out the problem areas, and then kind of feel empowered to begin that energy journey. I know that definitely happened to me from just using the home energy saving kit around the house I'm currently in. Kind of
Yeah.
just it is like a light switch, not to use that analogy of like, oh, but it is like something kind of, okay, I understand how things are working, so therefore I can, make those changes going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Like, so really familiar with your home energy kit. My wife actually works in the libraries in Fingal as well, so they have them in all their libraries. I've used it myself. It's a fantastic tool for and again, a lot of us probably have an idea of the problem areas in our home as well. You know that you're cold when you sit in a particular spot or in a particular room.
Yeah.
But again, it's great to be able to sort of kind of measure it with the tools in the home energy saving toolkit, and
Yeah.
definitely a great. And the fact that it's you can do it yourself, it's free. How much what more
I
can you
know.
for that?
It's a win-win, isn't it, in
Yes,
those
yeah,
instances?
it's
So,
great.
ideally, we'd obviously all love to be in a position where we can kind of carry out all the upgrades, at once that we'd like to. And I know that is kind of recommended to do at least more than one, but very few of us have the finances to do all of this at once. So, if a budget is tight, what would be the best value measure to carry out?
I think again, bringing it back to kind of the first question there. I think
Hmm.
attic insulation. If you have what I'd consider like a regular attic, so an
Hmm.
attic that's insulated at ceiling level, that you can get into and access. Not
Hmm.
you in particular, but there is access to it.
Yeah.
So essentially, you pop your head into the attic hatch or up the stair and have a look in, and
Hmm.
it's at kind of ceiling level, like rolled out like across the joist or between the joists. If you have that type of attic and you can access it all, that to me is like the best and cheapest kind of most high, with the lowest cost with the highest impact sort of
Okay.
upgrade that you can carry out.
Okay, so we are big fans of attic insulation, but if you were to kind of rank in terms of the home energy upgrades that are available to Irish homeowners at the moment, so I've got a list of them in front of me here. So
Mm.
just in terms of ranking them, and putting them in order of priority that would kind of yield the most effective outcome in terms of energy efficiency. So we've got attic insulation, which we know is a great place to start. Wall insulation, heat pump installation, heating controls, and then solar panels, so obviously solar thermal and solar PV. So could you kind of talk us through where you think they should all rank?
Sure. And I suppose for me anyway, it goes with the cost versus the impact. So, okay, maybe not all wall installations, for instance, looking at the list that we have, and not all wall installations might be kind of dependent on the type of walls you have. You might rank them in a different order, but sure, we'll start at the top. I suppose attic insulation, definitely. What's recommended is a fabric first approach. So you're talking about upgrading the build and fabric, so your attic, your ceiling, your walls, your floors, windows, doors. But with when it comes to cost versus impact, I suppose the next one kind of in that list would be heating controls. Heating controls make a huge difference to any home, and I suppose space heating and water heating is such a big cost. Um, when kind of running a household, that the installation of heating controls has a huge impact, and again, not not excessively expensive,
Okay.
dependent on the type of house you have, the number of radiators, that sort of stuff. But heating controls would probably be my next one kind of on the list. So
Okay.
attic and heating controls, I think, is a really good place to start. After that, kind of again, we're back to the fabric first kind of side of things, where I'd probably start looking at my wall insulation.
Okay.
Um, if you have cavity walls in your house, so that's a particular type of construction where it's two blocks kind of, either side, and there's like a gap kind of in the middle that can be filled with insulation. So they drill in from the outside, pump beads, insulation beads into the cavity that's there. That's generally where I'd go next. Again, it's fairly low cost, low impact, quick to do, or not low impact, high impact in terms of energy, but in terms of on your life, on your house, it's
Mm,
fairly low impact. Like they'd come be there and probably finished in half the day. There's very little cleanup. It's done from the outside. Unless you need some vents maybe fitted or something like that, there's
mhm.
very minimal sort of works required kind of afterwards. When you get into the different types of wall insulation, like internal wall insulation. Um, yeah, your internal wall insulation, the insulation boards will go on the inside, or the insulation system goes on the inside. But generally, that results in redecorating, painting, wallpaper, and new carpets, skirting boards, that sort of stuff. So,
Yeah.
it's a little bit more invasive and it's a little bit more expensive.
Mhm.
So in terms of I would kind of go attic, heating controls, if you have cavity wall insulation, those three alone would make a huge difference to your house. They're not very expensive,
Mhm.
and a huge impact on those ones. After that, I'd probably continue on with the fabric first approach. So I would then it would be cavity wall, and then I'd start looking at other wall measures if my house wasn't suitable for it.
Okay.
Lots of houses around the country have cavity walls. The Greater Dublin area is probably more predominantly like hollow block walls, which aren't suitable for cavity wall insulation. So you'd be looking at external wall insulation or internal wall insulation. And
Mhm.
again, there's pros and cons to both. I suppose internal will be probably the next expensive or more expensive after cavity wall, and then external will be the most expensive. But there's pros and cons to both, um, and either or, like I said, in terms of the end the end result. Really, what you want to have a really well insulated wall, and what we recommend is 0.27 of a U value, um, and that's kind of where you'd want to be looking at when you're insulating your external walls.
So what can you just explain what is a U value?
So U value is essentially the amount of heat that transfers through the wall. So the lower that
The
number,
better.
yeah. So
Uh-huh.
you're looking for kind of low numbers when you're looking at U value. So it means that there's not much heat actually traveling through to the outside.
Okay. Okay.
So
Brilliant.
I suppose after that we've heat pumps and solar left. So again, um, heat pumps require all the above to be done first anyway, because it's important when you're installing a heat pump that the house is really well insulated and relatively airtight. So in terms of heat pump installation, that would naturally come after your attic and walls anyway. and
Hmm.
possibly windows and doors kind of included there if you want to install a heat pump. Um, but the heat pump is, and with heat pumps, again, dependent on the year of the house, like heat pump grants and heat pumps are kind of, heat pump grants are eligible to houses built right up until, pre 2011. So right up until the end of 2010. So there's lots of houses out there that are probably, probably they are heat pump ready uh, already,
Okay.
or very, very close to being heat pump ready. So although like there can be quite a lot of work to do for houses that are a little bit older, there's lots of houses that have been built kind of maybe in the last 10 years or so, 10, 20 years, that would be, quite close to being heat pump ready already. And then after that, we're into solar panels, solar thermal, solar PV. Um, and again, I suppose, particularly with the solar PV or solar electricity, you're into sort of micro generation. So that'd be sort of like the icing on the cake. You go for your fabric first approach, then you go and look at your, heating system and get it kind of over to something that's a lot more efficient, like a heat pump. And then, you're into your micro generation like solar PV. And that's something that I'd probably, nice to have it. But for me, I'd probably like to get a heat pump in
Hmm.
first.
Yeah, brilliant. And so, in terms of attic insulation, let's say, like you're saying, that is the starting point, and even wall insulation. Hopefully, the same advice will apply across the board. But what would be your advice in terms of getting a contractor to do this work? What are the questions that we should be asking of them? Are there any red flags that we should kind of be looking out for?
Um, in terms of getting a contractor, I suppose SEI have or the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland have a database of registered contractors,
Hmm.
and a registered contractor will have signed up to, provide, to do grant works or do these upgrades in accordance with what they call their domestic technical standards and specifications. So it's the DTSS kind of,
Hmm.
which takes into account all of the building regulations, everything that really needs to be considered in an upgrade. So for me, that's probably the best place to start, is to
Hmm.
start searching there. But again, there's a lot of contractors registered there, so it's really hard to kind of, sort them out. Find, who's good, who's available, who's local. So I'd say in that regard, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your neighbors, talk to somebody that you've had that's had it done before. You know,
Yeah,
um,
recommendations. Word of
you know,
mouth is
word
key.
of mouth and recommendations. If that isn't something, if that is an option, or it's not, or you don't know anybody that's had work done before, I'd say, maybe, go to the list, have a couple of contractors come out, survey and quote for the works. I also think it's really important that they're quoting like for like, so similar, similar products, similar sort of specification, and then you'll be able to kind of compare. Then, one of the things, not, one of the things I would look for is somebody who specializes in installation works. There's lots of people who can and will do installation, but they're not necessarily installation companies or specialists in installation. You want
Hmm.
somebody who knows what they're doing. You want somebody who does this kind of day in, day out, and they know what they need to, they know what to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. And I suppose just taking that time to actually find the right person, is really important. And I think it's interesting. A few months ago, I was on one of the many Zoom webinars that we've all been on over the
Yeah, yeah,
last few months. But I remember one of the speakers was saying, it's so important that we make sure that we're not, heating the street instead of our
yeah,
homes. And I just thought that was, again, I think that's just the way I think. It's just very visual. And I was like, oh my gosh, like we are pumping money, and literally flushing it down the toilet by
yeah,
just
yeah.
heating the street. And, that's why insulation is just such a great place to start before you start investing in,
In
renewables and
technologies and renewables, yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. The fabric first approach is definitely, like, there's a lot of merit in that, in terms of, save the energy. Don't be creating energy that's just going to go out the window. Reduce the amount of energy you need before you start investing in technologies that's going to generate more energy.
Yeah.
So particularly from a climate change and carbon point of view, we want to reduce the amount of energy that's used.
And so, in terms of, you'd mentioned wall insulation there, and you'd mentioned the different types in terms of, cavity wall insulation and things like that. Could you kind of maybe just even expand a little bit more on that in terms of, what is available and what homes would be suitable for these?
Yeah, sure. In terms of your cavity wall insulation is generally the cheapest to install. It's in that type of wall that I kind of mentioned earlier on. So it's like
Hmm.
two rows of blocks kind of built parallel, and they have this gap in the middle that can be filled with cavity wall insulation. The next is internal wall insulation, or what we kind of traditionally call dry lining. But that dry lining, also has like an insulated kind of board on it. So it's kind of like a plaster board with insulation kind of on the back. They're generally kind of quite thick, or at least the ones that we like to see installed are quite thick, because obviously the thicker the insulation, the better kind of heat retention you're going to get. So they generally, there's lots of different systems and ways of installing them. Probably talking to your contractor about how that would actually be done, or the system that's used, because it's going to be, it may be specific or particular to your house.
Hmm.
To get a contractor to come in and maybe advise on the best type of system to use there. But essentially, we're looking to get kind of, a good thickness of insulation there, get the U value down to the target U values. And again, the U value being the amount of heat that actually will get, transmitted to the outside. We want that obviously as low as possible. Um, within, there is some practical sort of issues kind of around that. You don't want to have 2 foot of internal insulation, like in a very small room, for instance.
Yeah.
So generally, like the boards, the insulation thickness is around 80 millimeters, kind of, and then with the board on top of that, the plasterboard is generally about 92.5 millimeters, like, so around 4 inches, kind of around that thickness would get you a really high standard of insulation. Um, Costs for that, again, there's going to be regional variances, um, and differences kind of there. There are extras, like if you have a lot of switches or radiators that need to be moved, generally that's over. But for the installation itself, probably anywhere between like 60 and maybe 90 euros square meter
Hmm.
would be a kind of good place to start. When you get into external wall insulation, that's where the insulation is actually fitted to the outside. Lots of people probably have seen it going around either locally in their, you know, houses kind of locally, where they're scaffolded out. You'll see these kind of greyish boards being fitted. There's different types of insulation, but generally the most common would be the kind of grey sort of graphite board that's expanded polystyrene, similar to the old sort of coffee cups, the kind of spongy coffee cups. Gets kind of fitted to the outside, and then they will finish over that with a acrylic or a render, or basically a plaster finish kind of on the outside, or an acrylic finish on the outside, and uh, and then that's your external wall insulation. It's quite expensive, but it provides like a really kind of fresh finish to a house as well. So there's lots of kind of, like, if you had, let's for instance, if you wanted to get your house painted, or you were going to get your house painted, or your house needed to be painted, and your painter was going to charge you 4 or 5 grand for that. Essentially, if you were to look at getting your house externally insulated, you'll get a fresh finish on it anyway, and you'll get your grant. That might be a good time to kind of go down that route if you have the type of walls where you can't get them cavity filled, and for whatever reason you don't particularly want to do internal wall insulation. Like if you've recently redecorated your entire house, or the rooms are quite small, there's lots of reasons why you might want to go with internal wall insulation, and external is the better option for you.
Hmm.
It's slightly more expensive, but again, it's really, really good insulator. Makes the house really airtight. There's lots of benefits to it.
Brilliant. And so, is it less so about kind of the expense, related to them? It's more so about what your house is suitable for. Like, would they all be considered quite effective? Like, there's, or is there one that's more so than the other?
Yeah, I think they're all pretty effective. I suppose from practical experience, sometimes cavity wall installation may or may not, it generally will provide a really good kind of end result. But an awful lot of it with cavity would be actually the quality of the original build, um, and air infiltration and stuff like that. Like, so if the house is quite leaky, or isn't particularly airtight before, okay, the cavity wall insulation will make it better, but you mightn't feel a huge benefit with it. I'd say that only happens in a small number of cases, and then you always have the other two to fall back on anyway. So I'd always say, if you have cavity walls, I would say, pump them first. you know, if it does the trick, you know, happy days. If it doesn't, maybe look at you'd have to go with a thin. You could easily use a thinner insulation on the inside because you already have that, insulation there.
Mhm.
It might be a case of just putting a thinner kind of dry lining board on the inside, or if you had a bit more budget, maybe you want to do something on the outside to freshen up the look of the house or something like that. Anyway, and that might be something you would consider at that stage. But yeah, it's very much down to the type of walls you have will determine where you go or where you're going to go.